morning, everybody. You're all very welcome. My name is Brendan Teeling. On behalf of Dublin City Council, great pleasure to welcome you to this event this morning, a lovely sunny morning in Dublin City. And I'm delighted to welcome Captain Lord Mayor, Councillor Costello. We have representing the commemorations naming committee, Councillor Jackson, It's a great event to be marking historical things for our city. I was talking to my mother this morning. She's in her late 80s, and she indeed remembers the barges going up down the river from her childhood and later. So it is something that's worthy of being commemorated. And so, look, before we start the formalities, I do want to thank a few people, Derek Whelan and the Inland Waters Association, who proposed that the plaque be erected. Diageo for their cooperation in allowing the plaque be erected around the wall here. Our friends in Limelight Events for looking after the practicalities. And of course, the Gardaí and Commemmorate who helped us with looking after the And I'd also like to thank my colleague Paula S. Paula's over here in pretty in pink. And she does a lot of the work in the background on the plaque scheme, so thanks for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, our first speaker representing the Council's Commemorations Naming Committee is Councillor Vincent Jackson.
Thanks, Brendan. Firstly, Deputy Lord Mayor, and to all my council colleagues, my apology. I thought it was 11:15, so it's my mistake. We have a big summer project down in Ballyfermot at the moment, and half an hour ago I was dropping a load of kids over to the new skateboard park and everything else, and I had a pair of shorts and a t-shirt on and everything else. But listen, this is a great day, obviously, for this part of Dublin and for the, I suppose, the industrial and the maritime heritage of the city as well. And just today, when the Deputy Lord Mayor unveils the plaque in a few moments, just to say that the Commemorations and Naming Committee in Dublin City Council has been instrumental over the last few years of acknowledging a huge amount of the issues and events that happened right across our city, from the suburbs into the city centre, down to the docks and everything else like that. And today it's another opportunity to commemorate one of those events. And I know my late parents, so they would often talk about the Guinness Barges going up and down. And I don't know what the Deputy Lord Mayor is going to say, but I had a few words written down. I'm not going to say them because I don't want to steal his thunder. But obviously, looking at the pictures, I'm too young for that event to remember them going up and down the liffey. And I was looking at Derek's little intro on this there when he was commemorating it a few weeks ago there, the 21st and the 27th of May when the last barge left here, Liffey Quay here. And a few days ago I was in Diageo there beating them about the next plan, and it's wonderful. Arthur Guinness got a great deal from Dublin City Council all those years ago. Who would have imagined 9,000 years of a lease for £45 a year? He did a great deal anyway. But it's great to see the brewery is still here, and with the development of Victoria Quay here, huge amounts of industrial brewing, and the heritage will continue on here. And the little bit that I was about the other day on Tuesday meeting people in Diageo is about what's going to happen, all the unused developments at the back of the old main brew house here. And I think it's very exciting for this part of the city. It's very exciting for the urban regeneration of the city, to reimagine what all those little side streets could be, and to widen the tourism opportunity that Guinness offers. Who would have imagined 30, 40 years ago that 1.6 million people would have gone to the visitor centre? They haven't gone there in the last year and a half, as we know. But I'm just saying, we can all increase the tourist offering by reimagining some of these wonderful old buildings that Guinness and Diageo are the custodians of, and we as the citizens who represent the communities around the city are here to ensure for future generations. So without further ado, I want to, as said, just again thank all my colleagues and you here for coming out on a busy morning, on a beautiful morning. And Joe, you could sing, I'd sing that Dublin song that with you here this morning. Dublin could be coffee at 11. But listen, well done to all concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Just to say on behalf of the officials, we appreciate the work done by the Council's Commemorations Naming Committee under the chairmanship of Councillor McDonough. It's the great support we get from Councillor Jackson and others. And so, I'm not sure what happened there.
No, it's okay.
We don't need an incident report. So it is a progress letter. Our next speaker is representing the Inland Waterways Association of Ireland. The Inland Waterways Association put up the original plaque all those years ago, which Councillor Costa was also Deputy Lord Mayor back then, and unveiled it. Where it went, nobody knows. But we're quite confident this one will stay on the wall for a lot longer. And so it's a great pleasure to welcome Jim O'Reilly as Chair of the Inland Waterways Association.
About the speech, I just remember the fellow from the IWAI spilling a bottle of porter over himself. This is a bit of product placement here. This, my friends, is one of the pillars on which our city was built, the Pillar of Porter. It rested not on a bed of rock or on stone, but on the foundation of water. Living water from under the shadow of Capure and Grand Canal water, crystal clear from the springs of Collinstown Fen. By the time Arthur Guinness had signed the lease of the brewery at James's Gate, a lease which granted him free access to water, the engineer Thomas Omer had completed 16 kilometres on the Grand Canal. And from that time, there was an incredible synchronicity between the life of the brewery and that of the canal, a connection that would last for over 200 years. The brewery were quick to capitalise on the canal's ability to deliver the raw materials to their doorstep at James's Street Harbour and export their porter countrywide to the new markets opened up by the canal. Back in the day when horsepower had 4 legs and a tail, things moved more slowly. A fully laden barge would take 4 days to travel from Dublin to Limerick, and the places along the way into the west were mysterious and unknown. As described in the ballad of the 13th Loch, I'll bring to thee a chimpanzee, a parrot, a jabberwock, a kangaroo and a cockatoo from the wilds of the 13th Loch. In the 19th century, the circular line of the Grand Canal transported annually up to 40,000 tonnes of export porter, one of these, malt, hops and coal between the Grand Canal docks and James Street Harbour. But all of this came to an end with the building of the Victoria Quay, the loading jetty right here in 1873. From then until 1961, the new fleet of Guinness barges would ply their trade 1 hour either side of high water up and down the River Liffey to Custom House Quay. It's appropriate that we're here at that time now. High water is about 12 o'clock, so this would have been back in the day a time of activity with all the barges fully laden, setting off on their journey down the river. There's a romance to travel on water, and even though they were only going to Customs House Quay, everybody knows in the back of their mind when they go down that river and keep going, they might end up in Australia or Canada or China, and there's no stopping. It's a super highway. The story of the barge is the story of Guinness's ability to innovate, always with an eye to the foreign markets for their product. At one stage making the Dublin brewery the largest in the world, none of which would have been possible without the waters of the Liffey and the Grand. In May 1960, the barge 51M, carrying a cargo of Guinness from James's Street Harbour to Limerick, made the last commercial journey on the Grand Canal. At that time, the brewery accounted for nearly 40% of all the traffic on the canal. The following year, June 1961, marked the end of 87 years of Guinness barges on the Liffey. Guinnesses have made enormous contributions to the inland waterways of Ireland. In the early 1960s, when the future of the Royal and Grand Canals was very much in doubt, the company established the Emerald Star Boat Hire Company on the Shannon, which was the catalyst for the establishment of a now thriving tourism business in the Midwest region. And when the restoration of the Royal Canal began in the 1970s, the Guinness Company provided the premises rent-free in Watling Street, just up the road, for the manufacture of lock gates. This support for an enthusiastic community initiative was vitally important at the time and very much appreciated. The first plaque to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the last barge sailing on the Liffey was unveiled in 1992 by then Chairman of Dublin IY, Owen Ganley. Today's plaque marks the 60th anniversary and will hopefully be a little bit more resilient than its forerunner. I would like to conclude by thanking Diageo, Dublin City Council's Commemorative Committee, along with Brendan Keeling for their support and help. I would also like to thank Derek Whelan and Niall Galway for their commitment to seeing this project to fruition. Finally, we very much appreciate the Deputy Lord Mayor, Joe Costello's unveiling of the plaque today. Deputy Costello has always shown a keen interest and support of the Dublin waterways, which is much appreciated by IY Dublin. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. Appreciate it. As Jim said, Guinness's and indeed Diageo have made a huge contribution to the life of the city. And for those of us who work in libraries and archives, they also have made a very particular contribution, because Guinness's has, I think, what is probably the best, certainly best looked after corporate archive in the country, and indeed around the world. I think it's well regarded as one of the best corporate archives. They take great care of their records, and they set a model for how that sort of work should be done for other organisations and companies. So it's a great pleasure for us to welcome, for me as a librarian, to welcome the head of the Guinness Archive, that's Evelyn Collins. Evelyn.
Great, thanks so much for those lovely words, Deputy Lord Mayor, councillors, everybody. It's great to be here today on this beautiful sunny day to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the last Guinness Barge. Some of our other speakers have talked a little bit about Guinness history. Well known, Arthur founded the brewery back in 1759. And I suppose when we work on the brand today, no matter if it's marketing or supply or making beer, we kind of have this rhetorical question that we always ask ourselves about what would Arthur think or what would Arthur do today? And I do think he would be very surprised by the fact that his brewery, 100 years after he founded it, grew to be the largest brewery in the world. The fact that it was exported, our very first export, is actually referenced by that bottle there that Jim had, going back to 1801. We hold the original recipe for the first export beer, which was brewed in December 1801, and that was destined for the West Indies. So this export and innovation and entrepreneurship is absolutely at the heart and the core of the brand. By the 1870s, the brewery had become so successful that we purchased the land from James Street to the River Liffey, and for the first time had river access. And that's really, I suppose, where the story of the barges comes in. So the Victoria Quay Jetty was built in 1873, and there's a lovely phrase about the brewery of old, that it was a city within a city. So it had its own fleet of barges, it had its own fleet of ships, it had its own railway network. Some of you will be familiar with the rail tracks that still exist around the brewery today. And the railway, there was 8 miles of brewery railway, which used to pop out the gate here at Victoria Quay and right across the road as traffic and out onto the jetty. And that's how the bulk barrels were transported from the brewery onto the barges. The barges themselves were amazing feats of engineering. We all know how tidal the liffey is, and so they were specifically designed with funnels that could be lowered to go under the liffey bridges. And there was 2 types of barges. The first barges in the 1870s were all named after rivers around Ireland. So you have the Roy, the Lagan, the Slaney. And then in 1919, the brewery introduced what was called the Farmley type of barge, which were all named after areas around Dublin City. So you have the Clonsilla, the Castleknock, the Killiney. And really up until 1961, they were the beating heart of the city. Every great city around the world, or most great cities around the world, have a river through their centre. And the barges were really the epitome of that for Dubliners. And I know certainly looking after the Guinness heritage and the Guinness archive, the barges really play a special role in the hearts and minds of Dubliners still today, of a certain generation, but also very much part of our culture. The puffball of steam was immortalised by Joyce. It's absolutely part of our Dublin tradition and what it means to be Dublin today. So I'd love really welcome the opportunity to speak to you today, to represent Diageo. We are extremely proud as a company of our heritage. The fact that we have an archive that's open to the public is very much testament to that. And our archive collection really represents a huge amount of what we're talking about today. Loads of beautiful photos of the barges. We actually have a photograph of the sailing of the very last barge on the 23rd of June 1961. Very poignant. The photograph is taken with all the backs of the men as they're sailing east down the Liffey. So thank you very much. I'm delighted to represent St. Diageo today and the heritage of Guinness. I'm delighted that Dublin City Council are working with us to commemorate that heritage, and the two companies and organisations working so much in tandem with each other. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Aidan, and congratulations on the great work you do. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you've gleaned by now, Deputy Lord Mayor, Councillor Joe Costello, was here back in 1992 to unveil the plaque. He's here again. We thank him for that. And so, we'd like to welcome the Councillor.
Thank you very much, Brendan, for the welcome, and it was fascinating to listen to all the contributions so far. I want to welcome my colleague here, Councillor Jackson, who does fantastic work in the commemoration scheme as well, on so many issues around about the city. And I want to welcome all of the people who are here today, all the Dublin City Council officials, Brendan of course, and Paul Ebbs, and others that are here, plus waterways, inland waterways. There's tremendous representation from Inland Waterways Ireland today. We have Jim, who has already spoken, and I just don't want to miss out on anybody. Jim Reardon, who is the present chair, Mick Kinahan, a former chair, Derek Whelan, also I believe a former chair, and very much active on the Royal Canal, as indeed are all of the members, Niall Galway and Rachel McCabe, the PRO. So fantastic involvement and engagement by Inland Waterways Ireland in our waterways. And of course, Dublin is iconic. Its iconic entities are water and Guinness. So, and the two of them are interconnected, because without good quality water in the Liffey and the Royal Canal, as it had been then, was a source of fresh supply of water, and these made Guinness what has become world famous as. So, I'm delighted to be here representing the Lord Mayor of Dublin as Deputy Lord Mayor, and it is indeed a sense of déjà vu for me. 30 years ago, it's hard to believe it now, I was Lord Mayor. It was the first time I was elected to Dublin City Council, and the then Lord Mayor, Sean Kinney, who was a Labour councillor, he appointed me Deputy Lord Mayor. In those days, the Deputy Lord Mayor wasn't elected. They were simply selected by whoever was the incoming Lord Mayor. So I was thankful to him for having appointed me to that position. So one of my functions excuse me, was to unveil the plaque here, and it really is a sense of déjà vu to be able to come back here in 30 years and also unveil another plaque. So I have to thank whoever that individual, whoever that scoundrel was, who went AWOL with the plaque that was here before to Diageo. Of course, it was just pure Guinness at that stage, but it has given me the opportunity of coming back and saying a few words in relation to both the water and in relation to the Guinness. I don't think I mentioned Evelyn Colgan in my remarks, and Evelyn, of course, has made a wonderful speech in relation to the involvement and the engagement of Guinness throughout the years here, and as one of the great employers, and also philanthropists. We have to think about all the philanthropy and look at Ivy House and Ivy Gardens and all that work that has been done in that area. But a good permanent employment, and that used to be the word always in my time as a young man, was if you get a job in Guinness, you're there for life. It was even better than the civil service, better than the banks. So Guinness was the one to go to if you could. I've got a wonderful speech that has been written by Brendan Teeling, and I don't intend to go through all of it. I will have to impart some of it because there's some very interesting information in it. Of course, at the late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, you know, people feel that everything that has been said about Dublin was said through Joyce, through Ulysses, because he depicted the entire city. And of course, he appears in the famous, what do you call it, Leopold Bloom, Bloom's Day, on the 16th of June. Bloom walked from the Cattle Market right across the city and down Eccles Street, and then he came across O'Connell Bridge. And of course, on O'Connell Bridge, what does he see in the Liffey? None other than the barges coming up. and he describes it in Ulysses as follows. A puffball of smoke coming up from the river, from a brewery barge, with export stout heading for England. So at that time, Guinness, and that was June 2004, Guinness was exporting down to the docks and exporting widely with Guinness. And Guinness built this jetty here for that purpose, to bring its barges down. And interestingly enough, all of the barges were built in Ireland. First of all, they were built in Harland and Wolff. That was the first, that was the Lagan, was the first one to be built there, up in Belfast. And they were all called after rivers of Ireland, the initial ones. Then they moved closer to home. They went down to the North Wall, and Ross and Walpole built the next number of barges down in the North Wall. And the final barges were also built down in the North Wall. 10 barges were built by Vickers, which was a subsidiary of Vickers and Armstrong down in the North Wall. They were the 10 final barges. And the names of those barges, Brendan was kind enough to write them all down for me, and I'll let you know what they were. Evelyn referred to a few of them. The Farmley, the Knockmaroon, the Chapel Izzard, the Fairhouse, the Castleknock, the Clonsilla, the Killiney, the Sandyford, the Hoth, and the Sea Point. So, you know, Guinness did really know its history and was very interested in ensuring that everything was named after locality in Ireland. And that's to be welcomed. And some of those barges had a very exciting time. For example, the Farmley ended up in the Scapa Flow of the Orkneys, and the Ferry House played a part, an important part, in the flotilla of small ships that went across the Irish Sea to Dunkirk to bring the British Expeditionary Force home, and did so successfully. Obviously, in the 20th century, a lot of historical events were witnessed by the men and women who worked in Guinnesses, but it was men only on the barges. And in fact, because they were dependent on the tides, as I think Jim or Brendan mentioned there earlier, they had to get special passes to go out during the War of Independence, because otherwise they'd be shot by the Black and Tans. So the tide, at night time, if there was a tide that was high tide and they were bringing down barges down, they were bringing Guinness down, they had to make sure they had their Black and Tans, they had their passes for the Black and Tans when they were patrolling the streets. And likewise, 100 years ago, in 1921, the barges were prevented from unloading their cargo at the Custom House because, of course, it was burned down in May of that year. And then again the following year, at the Battle of the Four Courts, the barges went merrily up and down the Liffey during the Battle of the Four Courts down to the docks. So inevitably, of course, the barges went the way of the trams, so-called progress, as Pete St. John would say, the fell to progress. And the last barge was the Castleknock, which sailed from here in 1961. And hopefully someday, you know, we've sort of seen the trams come back with both the Dart and the Lewis, and the rail being renovated again, and hopefully maybe we'll have the barges again, but we'll have a different fuel. We might have hydrogen-powered vessels going up and down the Liffey, and wouldn't that be a nice sight to see again here on the Liffey? Councillor Jackson spoke about the Council's commemorative plaques, the plaque scheme, and all the good work that it is doing and continues to do. And we can safely say that the Guinness barges are more than worthy of this plaque and have been formally remembered by Dublin. And we do have so many memorials in Dublin. You know, memorials are normally to patriots down through the centuries, or they're to musicians or writers or artists. But it really is important to mark people who have made such a contribution to this city, and to mark an entity like Guinness that has made such a contribution. And, you know, these are the men and women who lived on the streets of Dublin, who worked in the streets, who worked on the rivers of Dublin and on the canals of Dublin. And, you know, they contributed so much to the social, cultural and economic life of the city. And it's important to honour them as we are doing with this plaque today. It tells us so much about those generations. And they earned their money and their livelihood for their families. So let us think about that side of it as well. Just the massive contribution that has been made by Guinness to Dublin, made by the men and women who worked in Guinness and worked here in the liffey. And could I say in conclusion that the history of Guinness is perhaps best known than that of many Dublin companies, and that's because of the well-staffed Guinness archives, and we owe a debt of gratitude to the Guinness archives for being able to
I think they're telling me it's about time to bring it to an end. So I just want to thank the staff. Anyway, look, a couple of final words. You can hear me anyway amongst the noise. Yeah, we have it here now. Thank you very much. As I said, I want to thank the staff of the Guinness Archives for all the good work they have done, and we heard so much of it in Evelyn's contribution. The Inland Waterways Association and Jim made a very fine contribution there, and I know so much has been done by that. And both myself and Councillor Jackson are on the committee that looks at Waterways Ireland, and we're keeping a close eye on the work that has been done and how important it is to protect our waterways here. They are such an amenity in this area in the city. And I'd like to thank all of them, Jim Reardon, Derry Queen, and all of the others that I mentioned earlier. And I'd like to congratulate and to thank Councillor Jackson for all the good work, and to pass on our appreciation to Councillor McDonough, who is the chairman of that committee, the City Council's Commemoration and Naming Committee. Finally, I'd like to thank the staff from both libraries, from the Culture Department in civic offices, the hard work that they do on so many matters, but also on this commemorations programme, and including this plaque scheme. So, to thank you all for the great work that has been done. I think it is so important that we do mark events of this nature. Just the history, and it's the history in its own right, but also the social implications of it, the economic implications, even the culture, the housing, all of that is involved in it, but mainly the men and women of the city of Dublin who have made this city such a great city, and to acknowledge the tremendous water that has helped to make this city, and I see a bottle of stout down here, that has made this city brewery such a fine brewery, and made it known and recognised as one of the great breweries the world over. So it is with great pleasure that I have the opportunity now of unveiling a second plaque here to Guinness's, the Guinness's plaque. And I'm delighted to be doing so, and to mark the 60th anniversary of the last sailing of the barge, and hope that in the future we may have future sailings of new barges coming up and down the Liffey. Thank you very much.